So it's possible you guys may have seen our short on this where we actually give a quick demo of what the table looks like. And in today's video, I'm going to show you how you can build it. Start by building the underlying frame. This is the square that's going to be formed under the table. Now, building a square out of 2x4s, especially if you want them to line up, is very simple. You're going to cut 3 inches shorter than the other 2. And this is going to give you the square when you put 2 pieces on the inside and 2 on the outside. You'll see when we actually put the frame together and when we have it on the table. With the pieces cut, now you can see how we're talking about. The 2 outer pieces will overlap the 2 inner pieces, which is why you need the inner pieces to be 3 inches shorter, and this will give you the perfect square depending on how long you, on the actual total length. Now I pre-drilled the holes because we're screwing so far to the end of the actual wood. I pre-drilled the holes to help avoid any splitting of the 2x4 itself and ensure that I don't split any pieces of wood when I'm putting a fastener this close to the end. Now here you can see the top and bottom piece are the 2 shorter ones I was referring to, with the right and left being the longer pieces. Ignore the bow, that was a fault of mine on the wood that I chose instead of being more careful with the wood that I picked off of the lumber shelf. Alright, in the next step we're going to be cutting all 4 legs. Now even though the legs are going to go in pairs and pivot differently, all 4 legs do end up being the same length, so once your saw is set you can set this up and knock it out. Of course we have to find the center. 2 of the legs are going to get drilled through on the 4-inch side and 2 of the legs are going to get drilled through on the 2-inch side, as you can see here. And that is all to do with the way we're going to have them pivot. Here I'm doing a very rough job of actually rounding it off. You can see I was trying to use the iPhone for a camera shot, which did not come out good. Thankfully I was able to get enough of a round off on these that they will actually function. I'm sure there's better ways to do it. For the other 2 legs, which were cut on the 4-inch side, the jigsaw proved a much better tool. And then all I had to do afterwards was hit them with the sander just to give them a good finish and make sure that nothing would rub. Now it's time to start installing the hardware. Now we're going to be using 4-inch bolts on the side where it's going through the wide part of the wood right there, and 6-inch bolts on the legs that are in the upper left hand corner where it's going through the short side. Each bolt will have a washer under the head and a washer under the nut, with a spring washer also to keep tension on the nut so it doesn't work itself loose. We have to use partially threaded bolts so it doesn't chew up the wood. Now with the frame assembled and the legs attached, we can actually move on to securing the frame to the tabletop, which still hasn't been cut yet. That'll come after. And with the frame finally attached, I can go ahead and cut the tabletop for this table apart from the plywood itself. Next thing we're going to move on to is the casters. Now these, obviously the plate that they're attached to is wider than the end of the 2x4 that they're going to be riding on, so I did have to make little extension pieces that basically turn the base into a 4x4 so that the caster does have something you can attach to. These are very simple. These are in the designs that I provide in SketchUp, and they screw in with 4 simple screws. I used 1 screw to attach it to the 2x4, and then the screws from the actual caster aid in the holding together of everything. And this gives you a rough idea of what the 4 legs look like when they're all folded in, mind you, without the cross pieces. Now hopefully with all 4 legs down you guys were able to see where we were going to have this thing fold completely flat. What I'm measuring for now is the side piece, not the stretcher, the cross piece that we're building. I chose to do these out of 1x4 rather than 2x4 to keep everything sleek, since this is not going to be a heavy duty table, it's just a work table in the garage. So one of the trade-offs of building the table this size, and I'm aiming to use only half of that plywood, is that I can't simply make the legs in pairs and have them fold into each other and still have the table fold as flat as I want to. This is what the table would look like mounted to the wall. I've gone ahead and colored one set of legs black and one white, so that way you'll be able to see when they cross through each other's path. Okay, so this is with the leg in its appropriate configuration. When you actually rotate the leg, even just slightly, you see there how it's cropping past. That is a perfect representation of what the issue is. So since we can't do that, the only way to do this is to have at least one piece be removable, because the legs physically can't rotate past each other. And now you can see that if we simply remove this piece, now there's nothing to interfere with this leg when it rotates. With the side piece removed, it's easier to see that the leg is not affected by anything. So the solution actually became, you'll see the hinge that I tried using earlier. The solution actually became that if I can make one of these cross pieces removable, it'll simply be removed in the opening process and then reattached, and then the same for storage. These knobs made it really easy to work with. Simply using a spade bit to kind of open up the hole for the washer I used as a guide plate. Then I drill out the hole, drill out through the actual wood for the knob, drill out the hole in the back, and then that's when I can insert one of these little wooden threaded pieces, and that's what will hold everything together. And I use those rather than screws because this is something that can be repeatedly screwed in and out without affecting its threads. So normally in all of the table builds that I have seen, people normally go for one stretcher down the middle, and while that's exactly what I went with, I opted to make one that would actually bolt in between the two side arms rather than something that would drop in place, just hoping that this would give it some additional strength and tension, and I thought the knobs would actually look pretty cool. So one thing that I did come across was that the actual threaded rod on the knobs was extremely long, and since I didn't need it to be that long to get good purchase, I figured I would just cut them. So I simply set the threaded insert to the length that I needed it to be for the actual cut, and used that to straighten the threads out once the cut was complete. The part has left the chat. So that was the end of holding it by hand, and from then on I finished all of them by holding them with a set of vice grips. And there you can see the difference is monumental. It's a lot, it's quite a few turns difference by eliminating that much of the threaded rod itself. Now that the table was complete, it was time to actually build the portion that would hold the table onto the wall. That meant pulling out the stud finder. You can see a seam to my left. That's where my wall goes from drywall and frame to concrete. So that simply requires a different fastener. Here I actually made the base, and this is all in the plans. Instead of using two complete sections of 2x4, the piece that actually supports the table is one 2x4, and I used offcuts for the actual pieces that attach it to the wall, simply locating them where I knew the studs would end up being when I actually put the thing on the wall. Now comes the all-important top piece. This is the piece that actually locks the table in place on the wall, and this is going to be made out of one single piece of 2x4. And there you can see our power actually coming back on. I did lose it for a portion of this build if you saw it was dark earlier. Now, other people have used wood and swivels. I'm actually using these spring-loaded latches, and I just grabbed a random piece of wood to use as a yardstick for locating them. I am going to go a little bit more into detail on how I actually set these latches up. These are simply spring-loaded latches that can basically drop into place to secure the table. There you have at least a rough idea of what the table looks like mounted to the wall, unfinished. So So our next step is I don't want to have to reach up for two separate latches. I want to make this as user-friendly as possible for me or anyone else in my household that might want to grab the table. So what I'm going to use is these little eyelets. I do have pulleys on the table. I ended up not using them. These little eyelets are perfect to actually pass the rope through and to create a sort of pulley system. The only downside is they have to be polished. After some quick work with the wire brush attachment, that is rectified. Here I'm kind of prototyping a rough idea of what I want to be able to do with the ropes by pulling in one location and pulling the two latches in the direction I want. Now remember, when you're creating a pulley system, it's all about the direction of the torque you're applying. So I want to be able to have this be a downward pull, but I don't want the rope to be right up against the wall. So I have to create a pulley system effectively to put the handle where I want it, and then to be able to simply pull straight down and activate both latches at once. So here you go, here's a rough idea of the final outcome, using two separate ropes through a little eyelet in the middle, and pulling both ropes together activates both latches. You may notice one little thing that I'm running into is there is a pin that holds the spring in place, which is catching on a little catch on the base. Here you can see a better view of that little pin that holds the spring, how it goes past the catch if you turn the larger pin to the side. The simplest thing to do was to grab a set of adjustable pliers and actually just press the catch out of the way, but that did bend the whole plate mechanism. So after straightening that one out, for the second one I screwed it to a piece of wood and then flattened the catch out of the way, hoping that the wood would keep the whole assembly straight. And this seemed to rectify the problem, and now they can be pulled straight up without any issue. And with the final setup ready to go, I put an extension on that 2x4 at the top, and that 2x4 is simply to give me a location out from the wall where I can actually pull the rope down, and that'll be what activates the latches so that I don't have to reach up to the wall itself. Simplicity, I am thinking safety, and also I think it looks pretty cool. And there you go, there's an example of what it'll look like. So I did decide that I wanted to use one rope instead of two, and you'll see now how I hook it up. So my original intention was to use a rope and a carabiner, and you can see there exactly what I wanted to do. I just want to be able to reach up, pull one rope. So here what we're doing is just a very, very light coat of clear on the actual top. The rest of the table gets a coat of black stain, the legs, even the bottom side of the tabletop. I'm just leaving the sides and the very top bare wood. It helps the legs disappear against the table when it's folded, and it looks pretty cool against the orange casters. Now at the very last second, I decided that I didn't want to be pulling on a rope, so I actually took a scrap piece of wood and actually used a rounding bit on my router to round it off, and I quickly made myself a little wooden handle. Now if you'd like to get the same effect and don't have a router or scrap wood, what you could do is actually just get wooden dowel from Home Depot or Lowe's when you buy the wood for the actual project, cut it to size, drill a hole in the middle, and you'd have your grab handle. And just to kind of deburr the hole, I actually used the countersink bit for drilling holes for screws. Another quick sand to get everything smooth again. While this may not have been the smartest thing to do, I was very careful and no accidents happened. And one more pass on all the edges and the two sides I cut, just to make sure everything's smooth, there's no burrs, there's no splinters, nothing to catch on my hand. And there you go, a grab handle made from some scrap wood. Just pass the rope through and put a knot on the end. And at the last moment, putting everything on, I decided to just opt out of using the carabiner. So I just made the same knot I had been making so far, with one modification, which allows you to loop it through a closed tie-off point, which was the other rope. And there is the table release system. Don't mind the flex in the 2x4 on top. I will add a small 45 later on just to secure it, but for now it's more than adequate. And this is actually my first time putting the finished table up to the wall and engaging the latches. See, even I can forget this stuff in my own setup. And there you go. That was my goal all along, to have the table, all the legs fold into itself and have it as flat as possible, even with the bow in the wood. Dude, that is the coolest thing ever! So guys, thank you so much for watching my video. If you made it this far, you are a legend. I know this was a more wordy video than normal, but I wanted to try and make sure I explained kind of every step as I went along the way. I'm going to have the complete parts list, plans, and hardware available on my Patreon, so if you want to head over and you can check that out, help support the channel. Now, this is still technically unfinished. There is another step that I'm going to be including, which is going to be more of a shorter episode. I might make it a short, but it involves the other half of the plywood that I actually cut off of this main section, and why I didn't make this table square. I made it a tiny bit under true square, and that was for a very specific footprint. But other than that, guys, the point was to make a small table that was easily usable by anyone with like single car garage or a shed, and have something strong enough that it could be a permanent table if needed. So if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, and hit the notification bell so that you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. For Crooked Mustache, I'm Alfred. Dale. We'll see you next time.